to our second session, which is exceeding expectations with best practice on data sanitisation in the modern world. As data breaches appear in the media on a daily basis, it's extremely important that our customers are aware of the importance of data destruction through its IT asset lifecycle. From daily discussions about protecting data throughout its lifecycle to being integral to their cybersecurity strategy overviews. Blanco is one of the most tested, approved, and recommended and certified data erasure solutions in the world. Chris and his team at Blanco in Australia and New Zealand have partnered with some of the largest organisations in the region, and I'd like to welcome Chris.
Good morning, and thank you, Brett.
Okay, I'm just going to open up the notes. Okay, Chris, can you see that?
I certainly can.
Yep. So compliance through audit trail ensuring the highest level chain of custody, so accountability of the asset from end to end, is something extremely important but not very well discussed, because the ability to take an asset while still under ownership all the way through to guaranteeing its destruction, its compliance, and also where it ends up back in the ecosystem. Can you just take us through that, Chris, how Blanco deal with that?
Absolutely, and that's why I have this, for those on the call today that work with Blanco will know this report very, very well. It's a digitally signed tamper-proof certificate. And for those that know me know that there's a couple of words in my vocabulary, and that is compliance through audit trail. And in order to have compliance, you need an audit trail, and it works in reverse. If you have an audit trail, you then have compliance. So we see a lot of practices where there is no audit trail, and in effect, there is no compliance. And this is something that we challenge, the industry with, and people that have never gone down the path of proper sanitisation, that have used inappropriate processes before, like reformatting or re-imaging, which unfortunately does not provide an audit trail, which in turn does not give them compliance. So it's something that is the core to our business, that we provide, the industry with the ability to be able to go back and have a detailed audit trail on that process. And we also say the same for all their other processes as well, whether it's logistics or whether it's other parts of the business that are part of that process. You should always have some form of an audit trail that will then give you that compliance.
So an example of an audit trail, when a customer either requires verification, or when a customer requires, I suppose, the assurity that what the ITAD has provided is what the ITAD has delivered. Can you just take me through the process of how the report takes place, but then also how it's presented back to the customer? So what we're seeing here is the certificate itself, but
so there's a number of elements on a report, on one of our reports, and one is the middle part and component. Obviously, the most important is the data erasure process that has been undertaken. Whether it's a NIST clear or a NIST purge or a DoD 3-pass, 7-pass wipe, you have the ability to choose, depending on your compliance, your algorithm of choice, to have that. It's also backed with the top component, which is the full asset detail log that shows the make, the model, the serial number, giving you access to all the asset log details. And then there's even diagnostics as a third component if you needed to do diagnostics, check, battery test. And then a lot of this is, then all of this is encrypted in a 256-bit encryption, digitally signed certificate. The report is in most cases available to the end user. We know a lot of our partners have API integration as well, and they can work that with an asset management system, even report that back to the customer through their APIs as well. So it's a full detailed report. It has global certification, and the actual certification was done here in Australia globally a couple of years ago through the Australian Cybersecurity Centre in Canberra. With that, it gives certainly our region, although it's common criteria certification, but for part, it gives the assurance here locally that this is regarded as the highest level of data sanitisation because that process was done here in our region.
And in doing the erasure report, does that also provide data that once the device is erased, that it is then satisfactory for reuse?
Oh, absolutely. So I don't know whether you can see that that middle section there is a little green component. I don't know if you can zoom that in, Brett, but that's effectively your verification. So if we cannot erase 100% of that drive, we will not pass this as a successful erasure. We will fail the drive or fail the machine. So if it has been erased and successfully erased, it will also provide a verification with that as well, that and depending on which erasure process you do, for example, a NIST format will also verify that there's no data left on that drive.
So Blanco's role in the circular economy and I suppose how it works, or gaining the attention of CXOs to achieve sustainability. Do you want to take me through the?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for many of us have heard the term and the phrase Gartner, and you know, they're now jumping on board, and they're certainly providing their details around what is best practice, and they're now effectively saying, we saw them a couple of years ago come out and say that data sanitisation is a core C-level requirement, effectively putting C-level executives on notice that if there was a data breach and they didn't follow best practice, that they are effectively liable. Now what they're doing is they're coming out and saying that, you know, we need to be the CXOs or the C-level executives of this world need to certainly start thinking about the circular economy, and in particular the reuse of IT assets and components within that to try and keep IT out of landfill and to try and achieve those sustainability and e-waste targets. So there is an entire report, as you can see on the screen there. That's just a snippet of what you know, that they have given us, but certainly they're jumping on board and saying that we need to, you know, if we've got and, you know, certainly hearing from our previous speakers, Steve and so forth, talking about ESG and, you know, sustainability, it is a very, very hot topic at the moment. It has been for a while, but we're really seeing a lot of momentum at the moment in and around this space. And to have an organisation like Gartner jump on and endorse this is certainly great for our industry, and it's exciting times ahead.
Can you take us through data retention policies and what that means to the ITAD with Blanco?
Look, data retention policies, Brett, it's one of those tough ones for especially the ITADs to get into, for the reason that it's not something we do, but it's something we have the ability to at least advise on that organisation. And you know, we're seeing a lot of unnecessary breaches, especially here in our region. And there were two big ones last year. I won't name and shame them. Everyone knows who they were. But, you know, they were hanging on to copious amounts of data unnecessarily for very, very long periods of time. We even had the Attorney General of Australia come out and say that data is not only can it be an asset, it can also be a liability as well. And that all comes back to having proper data retention policies. You know, what is good data, what is bad data? We've seen the likes of organisations like Veritas that have come out and said that more than a third of the data that's stored is not relevant, and there is a cost to it. There are challenges with managing it as well. We're seeing a lot of duplication in data. We're seeing a lot of obsolete data. Presentation slide decks are a perfect example. You know, in any organisation, one slide deck will sit on a 500 times because everyone's got a copy of it, and it's stored here and it's stored there. So it really comes back to having great policy at the beginning to ensure that you don't have unnecessary data stored, whether it be on your end compute device or in your own cloud or on-premise server.
Yep. And let's go to the other side. What about data destruction policies, and how do you engage clients around getting them to think about data that Blanco is looking at, where it what can and can't be destructed, and also what is the obligation on the customer to ensure that?
Yeah, look, data destruction policies is the one that's at the heart of it for us, and certainly a lot of conversations that we have with our partners and their customers, and that is because their policies are outdated. Someone took the liberty, 10, 15 years ago to write a format that says this is what we must follow, and unfortunately it hasn't been updated since. We see a lot of organisations just continuing on with that same policy without realising that technology has evolved, and with that need to really move to modern times. You'll see degaussing is one popular format and still in use, but it only works on the HDs, on hard drives. It does not work on a solid state drive, so you cannot degauss a solid state drive. So having a policy in place for that doesn't really make sense. Degaussing also doesn't allow the reuse and repurpose of that drive if you wanted to then create that circular economy and have sustainability targets. You've got the likes of shredding, which is essential and is required, especially if you've got damaged and faulty drives, or you're carrying top secret or classified information. But the challenge with shredding is you cannot do that in a cloud or a virtual environment until that data center is itself decommissioned at end of life. And again, it doesn't allow you the opportunity to reuse or donate these drives. We still see a lot of ineffective data erasure formats, whether it's a delete, a reformat of a drive. That comes back to compliance. There's no audit trail in many of those cases. So what we have is ineffective use and for the ability for the data to still be accessed. One there relying on old standards. We still see a lot of organisations, and again, this comes back to that policy that was written 10 and 15 years ago, insisting on an old standard like a DoD 3-pass wipe versus a NIST format. And we know that the last time the DoD standard was updated was back in 2005 or 2006. So it was actually before smartphones came to the market. So, the opportunity for us is to certainly educate the market, where we are gaining a lot of momentum in this area. Certainly in my time, especially in the last couple of years, and certainly the likes of COVID have helped escalate a lot of these discussions to the point where then organisations are now adhering to updating their data destruction policies.
Yeah. Well, I suppose my journey with Blanco over the last couple of years really started as in the IT asset ecosystem, or as we sort of go into what we talked earlier about circular economy, but really we focus purely on networking infrastructure, and part of that means that we were missing out on server infrastructure, telephony infrastructure, We were missing out on a whole heap of other opportunity that was allowing other competitors to come in and play that pseudo ITAD role. Now, where I first engaged with Chris 2 years ago is that we had an opportunity to take out a data center's worth of equipment, but the customer was also getting other ITADs to work through on putting a price together and remove that hardware. Now, what I did find out is that the ITADs that were involved in ensuring this data destruction was basically a 3-pass wipe and an email, which is not really a certificate of what I would call destruction, and didn't really, if audited, you would not be able to tie it back to a serial number of the device itself or guarantee that it actually was performed correctly. Over and above that, we're just talking about hard drives. They didn't articulate that they couldn't destroy the data on SSDs in the way that Blanco could. But over and above that as well, we have networking infrastructure, mobile phones, etc., that really have the same requirement to have the information on them destroyed effectively. Now, this all plays back into the ecosystem of buying of assets all the way through to the reuse or destruction of assets. Where is most of the effort these days in ensuring, and this is just an off-the-cuff question, customers are quite often having to have legacy infrastructure removed. What is it that Blanco, over and above hard drives, what are the considerations that any ITAD should have that are ensuring they're not missing out on opportunity to their customer in making sure that all the equipment gets destroyed or the information gets destroyed or reused in the right way? So what do you do about mobile phones as an example? What do you do about SSDs versus hard drives? Or what do you do about networking equipment, etc.? Can you just give us a little bit of an overview on that?
Yeah, absolutely, Brett. And look, I'll start by saying, a previous session with Steve where he said this is an exciting time for the ITAD industry, and it certainly is, because the ITADs are seen now as the experts in data destruction. So, there are great opportunities ahead. And, from our perspective, what we're seeing is that there are opportunities in and around all facets of data, whether it's a virtual machine that sits in a virtual environment and needs to be sanitized. It could be a data center, it could be an AWS or an Azure environment that files need to be accessed and removed, down to physical assets in mobile phones, smart tablets, laptops, desktops, servers, networking equipment. And in and around all that, you've then got the complexities around updated compliance policies. So what we're seeing is that organisations are now starting to put some effort into this area, which is changing and updating those policies. One of the policies we see today is that a lot of organisations now won't allow secure data to leave their secure environment. So they'll actually challenge the ITAD or the partner to actually come and do that on site or use remote tools to wipe that data. And, we've seen over the last couple of years, the working landscape has evolved and changed. Gone are the days of having 5 floors in the city location with, 1,000 desktops. It's now 1,000 laptops, people working from home. And with that creates the challenges of, if they do move on, all those that IT equipment needs to be remarketed, it's end of life and needs to be sent back. How do you get that back securely? So there is a great opportunity for the ITADs, especially for those that want to evolve into that sort of more of that services space, and that's where we are seeing opportunities come there. But at the same time, and as you can see from the screen, you've got a lot of new regulations have come into play now. Years ago we never had a GDPR or a notifiable data breach scheme or the California Privacy Act, and there's more around the world that are putting rules and regulations in place of what we must follow. The amount of data that's been collected as well, it's at a greater speed. We just cannot keep up, and we're seeing that data, and managing that needs to be top of mind for organisations, but obviously for the ITAD partners as well. So it really comes down to making sure that the ITAD is completely aware of what the customer's requirements are, and from there they can certainly provide a policy and a system to sanitize equipment as required.
Thank you. So I suppose how do we engage the services of Blanco? So we might have an ITAD. Now, there's two options, and we've got a couple of fantastic ITAD service providers here in Australia that are part of this conference that use Blanco. Or if an ITAD wishes to use Blanco itself, what's the balance? Is it where would you start to leverage an ITAD partner rather than start to go down the path yourself? And what are the different models of engaging with cloud services, on-prem services, etc., to give those that are starting out in this conversation a way to make sure that they don't go down the easy path and first of all ignore the risk they're creating to their clients, or be ignorant and not do the job properly. Yeah, if you could just give us a bit of an overview on that, please, Chris.
Yeah, definitely. So with we've seen, and certainly in my time, I've seen some of our ITAD partners that started off extremely small, very small, to the point where they're now some of the largest in this region. So it all comes back to ensuring that you do have a policy in place. Remember, if you go back to the beginning, that whole piece around audit trail and compliance, and some of the ITADs that we were dealing with back in the day weren't compliant because they didn't have proper reports. They had Excel sheets that were editable and so forth. So it didn't appease the customer. But by providing a system that you're able to go to market with, and Blanco can scale to certain levels. We can go, we can do very, very small ITADs. We can do, we can work with large ITADs. We work with all of them globally. But it really comes down to the ITAD ensuring that they've got a proper system in place. The exciting times right now is the fact that we are the experts in this area. Customers don't understand data sanitization, and I keep telling my partners, for a customer to do it themselves, they need to scale up. They need to have their own warehouse, their own IT team, and engineers on the floor to process stock. So it's not cost effective. So the ITAD model certainly works well. And there's a lot of other elements in an ITAD industry that Blanco don't play a part of. We don't do secure logistics, secure warehousing. We don't do remarketing. So this is something that an ITAD does. We are an integral and important part of that scheme, but there are many other processes that the ITAD must also follow, that when they are providing a service, that all their other systems are in place as well.
And I think from my learnings as well, goes back into the conversation, what is the effort, what is the cost to destroy or protect the data for the customer? Because there's policies that might mean you have to have resources destroy the data on site. Therefore, you have to have engineers that have access to it or have remote access to it to destroy it before it leaves site. Or you might have pallets of equipment that needs to be destroyed on site securely. And people quite often overlook what is the effort and the time involved, and ensure that they have that conversation with the customer, because you can spend a lot of time and a lot of cost of something that might be very well overlooked. And I think that's what happens when people take the easy way out, is they might, when they're not working in a compliant environment, might push it aside without understanding the risks fully. But I could also understand that if you had the right conversation with your customer, and whether that be with a Blanco partner or an ITAD or yourself, the customer is going to want to understand the importance of not having his data breached and be in the media or be negligent in some form that will ascertain fines or legal proceedings. So from my personal experience, it's something that needs to be thought about in the same way that you think about getting your IT assets and putting them into that circular motion of going in and going out. There is a cost involved that needs to be discussed with the customer, because it should be a profitable outcome, both from a sustainability perspective, but also from a business perspective. And if you're not having that conversation, the customer's not educated, it makes it hard for you then to get your foot back through the door. And sometimes people do just fight to the bottom. They will, they might see value in an asset and they'll do what they can to get away with it. But that's at the risk of their customer that they're trying to look after at the end of the day. So is there anything else, Chris, you'd just like to bring up in relation to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Brett. I mean, remember, we are the experts. So, we have an obligation to educate and teach the market about better practices. The one thing that, I quite often hear is that when it's end of life, it's also end of budget, which makes it challenging. So pricing is eroded. So what we need to do is we need to change the narrative and get the conversation happening more at the beginning and make it part of their security policy and their cyber policy, which then allows for higher budget. So I challenge ITADs when they are talking to customers, make sure that they're talking to all facets of the customer, whether it's the marketing, the people internally, to find out whether they've got near-term and long-term emissions targets, their CEOs as well, to find out what their stance on is on those targets and what they want to achieve, especially if they're having to report back to if they're a publicly listed company and they're having to report back to shareholders and a board of directors. Quite often the IT department will just take the easy way out and just go on what they've done on for the last 10 or 15 years without really looking closely at there are other options to look at. So certainly challenge the organisation, push them hard on the cybersecurity element. Remember, a data breach is very costly. Not financial, well, apart from being financially, also from the tarnish of your brand name, what it can achieve, what it can do to you. So you want to make sure that you're covering all areas, and for us, it's being able to be seen as those experts in those areas. And there are other components of that end of life component that, again, ITADs specialise in. Whether it's in just the destruction of the equipment, to the e-waste, shredding, to the remarketing, buyback, and so forth. So, yeah, certainly talk to the customer, find out who are the decision makers, find out whether they've got compliance regulations in place, and maybe even speak to the compliance directors as well.
Yep. I'm in total agreement with that. My strategy in these discussions is to work through with procurement. So this discussion is had at the conception phase of the deal. That in the same way that they purchase licensing, in the same way they purchase maintenance, they should also purchase a sustainable outcome for not only the data but the hardware itself. Because quite often, as you mentioned there, the budget's gone, the asset's been sweated, and there's no purpose for it. Very hard to create an opportunity if you're at that last bit of the sales cycle. So I always try to make sure that when I'm talking with procurement or any parts of my customers' decision-making process, that it is forefront, because I only started thinking like this a couple of years ago, but it's something that has to be accountable from the start. Otherwise, those that don't care will finish up with it at the end, and that's a missed opportunity for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And, I've actually helped partners where they've had these challenges before, where they've said, look, Chris, sorry, but, the customer's saying they've got no money, it's end of budget, they don't have any budget. And we went and challenged them on that. We spoke to them about potential data breaches. We spoke to them about compliance, audit trail. We spoke about the security elements, and guess what? They went and found budget for it. So most organisations have an over and above cap for cybersecurity. So we may need to reposition some of those discussions in that cyber piece to ensure that they are allowing a sufficient budget for these processes to take place.
Fantastic. All right, if there's any questions or comments to feed through, otherwise, Chris, if there's nothing else to raise, we've got the next presentation in 10 minutes. I thank you and Blanco for taking part in this conference. And
absolute pleasure, Brett.
And everybody in the audience here, if they have any questions around data destruction or want to reach out to Chris or some of the Blanco partners here at ASCDI, please feel free to get in contact, and we'd be more than happy to help. Thank you.